Good day, Thomas Jefferson Hour podcast listeners. And as always, thank you for listening.
I want to apologize to the universe.
I know why.
I made one of the worst historical mistakes of my career.
And let's have it.
I wouldn't be surprised if people never listen again to this program.
I wonder if there's anyone listening at all.
I live in shame and in a sense of deep humiliation. On a previous show, in a moment of great weakness, I said that Quick Draw McGraw was a dog.
How could you?
When everyone knows that Quick Draw McGraw was a horse. Mm-hmm. To call him a dog is a slur against Hanna-Barbera cartoons. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of American culture.
Okay, enough.
No, but I mean, look, you got to get it right. If you're wrong on things like that, how can you be right on Jefferson?
I think I might still have a vinyl 33 RPM record of that from my youth.
Hey, Quick Draw.
Yeah. So having said that, we had a fun discussion about your trip. And somebody wrote in, I think it was on Facebook, and said, they need to make a matchbox of Clay in his traveling truck.
What's a matchbox? Oh, a little figurine.
This is a matchbox. And
I brought you that back from the Steinbeck
did, so
tour.
there already is one. So
I guess we just a little picture.
We'll have to get a picture of that on the site.
There,
yeah. It just needs a little clay figurine on the inside.
It was a great trip, and it was so it fulfilled my dream of the trip, and it just awakened my desire to do more of this. And
then we talked about a lot of email.
In
response to the show Baked In, which is tough because, the whole purpose of that show was to try to encourage civil discourse. And you made a comment at the end of the show, which I think people can just listen to, that will stand.
Well, I get into this a lot. I posted something on Facebook last week about philosopher kings. And then the responses started to blow in from every direction.
I read that and I was going, why do you even do this?
I was trying to make one little point that the current president is not a philosopher, whatever else he is or is not. But boy, then I count the number of responses till you get to the word Obama. And people just let her all hang out. I'll tell you what. But part of it was this little simple question. During the campaign, did Donald Trump parody a disabled reporter with gestures and so on? And there were people that said that never happened. That's fake news. That's typical liberal to say that happened. And so I went back and watched it, and you think, well, whatever else is going on here, this is a parody of somebody who is physically out of control. But if you can't even agree on that, if you can't agree on a video that exists in the world, or like when President Trump said of Meghan Markle, that she's a nasty woman, and then the White House said he didn't say that, and then the news media said, well, here's the tape, and they said, no, he didn't say that, and this went on for like a day, and then they finally said, well, he said it, but he meant she had said a nasty thing. That doesn't mean she's a nasty person. Even though he clearly said, well, she's a nasty woman. This is what we're talking about, is can we agree on anything anymore? Can we agree on anything?
We can.
And what? Name something we can agree on.
We want America to survive and thrive. And what's the best way to do it?
Well, here's what Jefferson said. If you can't respect the other side and regard their point of view as legitimate, we can't make this work.
And what it's devolved into, in particular, like when I saw it, I do not do Facebook. I mean,
you saw me suffering.
Hardly ever do I, but I got because you and I are friends on Facebook, I got a notice that there was a post. So I'll look at it. And I just went, Clay,
what's
I
wrong
got to have
with
a
you?
Talk with you. Don't do this, because all it does is inflame people.
Wasn't meant to inflame. It was meant to be an insight.
I know it wasn't, but that's what it does.
When I read this statement in a book that Plato had said, we can never really master life until philosophers become our kings, or until our kings learn to be philosophers. So that's very Jeffersonian, very, 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 very high-minded.
Right.
And then you think about that. Okay, well, We don't do kings, and we're an elective republic, and so on and so forth. But you think, all right, as presidents go, which ones would you say are in the running to be a philosopher king, and which ones would you rule out?
But I don't think people take it that way. They take it like, I am going to write a post on Facebook that everyone is going to agree with, and I'm going to change the world because I am right. And it's like cheap entertainment. And, this feeling of power with no responsibility. It's a bad, bad thing.
So
I would like some of those people that are extreme to call you and be on a show.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Oh no, I would.
No, I'd like to interview them.
I would too.
Because I respect them as long as we play the game with certain ground rules of evidence, rationality, and civility. We can disagree. So
I'll contact the show, but don't do it on Facebook.
Philosophers: Jefferson, John Quincy Adams, Woodrow Wilson, maybe to a certain degree John Kennedy. Non-philosophers: Andrew Jackson, Gerald Ford. Nixon might be a philosopher president, but the point was just what Plato was saying, which was what you want is a very highly educated, highly evolved, self-actualized, complete, wise, rational, grounded, philosophically adept person to be the leader of your country, or you have to take the leaders of your country and train them to that kind of disinterestedness and dispassionateness and capacity to weigh evidence, nuance, contextualization. And so when I read that, I thought, forget Donald Trump, I thought, well, that's not really the world that we live in. And then I thought of Donald Trump, and I burst out laughing and thought, well, whatever else is true, no one's ever going to call him a philosopher king. Well, turns out I was wrong. Turns out that I was righted on Facebook.
Okay, so let's go to the show this week.
Wait a minute.
I hope everyone had a good and happy and safe 4th of July.
I won't.
And you want to do a
Jefferson in France, October 17th through 26th.
The correct dates.
October 17th through 26th,
And
Jefferson in France. Winter retreats, space program 12 through 17 January. Charles Dickens, 18 through 23 January.
And as always, go to jeffersonhour.com. You can find information about Clay's Cultural Tours there. And if you would like, you can support the Thomas Jefferson Hour, and we so appreciate it.
And can I just say, I'll do the thinning around here, Baba Louie, and don't you forget it. It's all right.
Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with or about President Thomas Jefferson. And this week we are joined by the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, the traveler who has returned, Mr. Clay Jenkinson. Good to see you, sir. I'm so excited to hear about your trip.
Oh, my. I'm glad to be back. I've been on the road this summer a lot, but
As many people know, because there have been all of these posts. You called in and we posted that.
I did something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, which is to rent a Steinbeck-like camper with a shell on the back of it. And then I went wandering about the high country in Colorado to national forest sites and just read and wrote and slept and walked and hiked. And I can tell you this much, it's been a big winter in the Rocky Mountains, and so all the streams were running bank full. They weren't flooding, but they were all running bank full. And I saw the source of the Colorado River. I saw the source of the Arkansas River. I saw the source of the Eagle River. It was just a magnificent journey. And then at the end of it, I went to Yellowstone National Park. I have some cabins there.
Well, I have to jump in here. We're doing what we normally do, which is sort of to jump ahead to the end of the story before setting it up. So as the semi-permanent
guest host,
for those who don't know, you drove from
Bismarck to Colorado.
And in Colorado, you rented
a Steinbeck-like camper.
And then you took, how many days?
Then I did 8 days up in the mountains, and then I came back, and then I drove to Yellowstone National Park, where my mother, who died a year ago this week, had 2 spectacular little Thoreauvian whimsical cabins right at Cook City, and they're mine now. And I went there to take a look at them and to write. And I'll tell you what, if you close your eyes and think of what should a cabin near Yellowstone National Park look like, That's
That's
it.
it. Huh?
These are not million-dollar cabins. These are rustic, whimsical, small. Thoreau's cabin at Walden was 12 by 14. That's what these are.
During this, you corresponded, and one of the things that I really was surprised, but you were disciplined about, was continually through this. You were having people say, "Oh, you're coming through. Stop by. We'll give you a place." And you said, "No, this is." You stayed solo on the whole trip, and you didn't visit, and I understand that.
Another time, I will do more and visit people and take advantage of their wonderful hospitality. People offered beds and
But that's not what
dinners
this
and-
trip was about.
This trip was about was a test. So let me go way back. When I was 17 years old, I had the idea that I would be a professional photographer, a journalist, and I would travel around as a photographer, and I would have an RV with a little darkroom in it, and this is how I would make my living. And oh my, that's one of my deepest, oldest dreams of life. And I've had some RV experiences and done a ton of camping and so on and so forth. I reckon that I've spent about a third of my life in motel rooms. So I've certainly been on the road enough, but I've always wanted to have not an RV, not a big whopping RV, Class A or Class B, just a little Steinbeckian camper truck. And so I said this to my handlers, and Nancy, whom you know, my scheduler, said, no, you can't, no, we're not doing that. She said, this is just one of your whims. You're going to, and she said, I'll tell you what, why don't you rent one for a week and see how you like it before you plunge into this thing? And so I thought, bingo, perfect. And so I scrambled around and found a place that does this, because I didn't want that thing where you see them, these Cruise America things where it feels like a U-Haul where it says rent this RV. I wanted to be incognito like Mr. Jefferson, and I didn't want to be that guy, right? So I found one where none of that's on there, and I rented it.
Without giving specifics, was it reasonable for those of us who kind of daydream about doing something like this?
It depends on how you look at it. It comes to about $170 per night. So that's the price of a motel room in much of Colorado today. But here's what I did. I just set off. I drove up the freeway, I-70. I got to Golden, where I wanted to see the Buffalo Bill Cody grave and museum. I've never been. And so I stopped there, and I spent a couple of hours there, and it was wonderful. And then I thought, where should I go? And I had a map, a recreational map of Colorado, and I looked at it, and I thought, I want to see the source of the Colorado River. So then I looked, where are the national forests up there? And I found them. Now, at this time of year, this is early June, so they're not all open. Some of them are still covered with snow. But I went, and I found one, and it was perfect. And then at that point, I said, that's what I'm going to do every day. I'm going to get up, I'm going to have breakfast, read for a while, and then I'm going to wander to another national forest campground somewhere in this high country of Colorado, and preferably find a camping spot in a national forest campground next to a stream with some hiking paths. And I'm just going to do that. I'm going to let way lead on to way in a kind of a serendipity pattern for a week, and that's what I wound up doing. And it turned out to be one of the handful of greatest adventures and experiences of my life. And now I got back, and my handler, Nancy, said, So? And I said, I'm getting one. I've got to have one. I have got to have one. I'm going to make this a big part of my life.
So you're going to sell like a couple of those 3 Corvettes that you have?
Sell my house.
Yeah, okay.
And then my boats and my cabins, and then I'll get a tiny little...
Future Jefferson hours.
I keep saying
gifts.
Gifts. I need a pickup and a camper.
Okay.
It's not too much to ask.
You have no shame.
No, why should I? So anyway, it was fantastic. But to get there, I drove my Subaru from Bismarck to Denver, and along the way I did this research. That's what you're talking about. I went to Wall Drug.
Right.
The famous Wall Drug.
And a lot of this is on Facebook and on the Jefferson Hour page.
I thought when you said I had this one, I wrote every day.
Yeah.
I would find a way to get to a cell service, and then I sent to our webmaster photos and my essays, and he posted them in a beautiful fashion. They're all on jeffersonhour.com/blog. So I did that. But on the way, I went to Waldrug for research, and I went to Carhenge
For research.
at Alliance, Nebraska. That's where cars have been
You're going to be
put
writing
in
a
the
book
ground.
about Carhenge and Waldrug.
No more. I'm writing a book about the Great Plains, and in it, one of the essays is about roadside effigies.
Uh-huh.
And so they're both in it.
Well, that's great.
And I learned a lot, and I took a lot of pictures, and I met a lot of interesting people.
Your whole trip was probably deductible.
Oh, that's the only reason I did it. Are you kidding? $175?
I don't want to get you in trouble here.
But I also had 2 lecture performances in Colorado, so that's why I did it so that
It worked out,
bookended, and then it paid some of the freight, paid some of the costs.
You came home tanned and rested.
I did. When I came home and I was at Yellowstone National Park, and we had this. I had this great server, and she came up and she said, "Whatever else is true, you've been getting a lot of good sun." She said, "You look like someone who has been out enjoying Colorado." And I said,
Yeah.
"Absolutely."
Yeah. In Colorado, you get tanned quickly.
And here's the thing. Because I'm now over 60, I have what's known as the senior pass.
Oh, sure.
Do you have that?
I do.
Never lose it because they're not doing it anymore.
Well, they are, but it's very expensive now.
And so-
but when I bought mine, it was like $20, $30.
Yeah, me too. Now it's way more.
And if you lose it, you have to
You have
start
to pay
from
the
scratch.
new freight.
Yeah.
So I have it. And when I did not know this, when I went into my first National Forest campground, the camp host who
Yeah.
lives he came by and he said, "You need to register here." And I said, "Well, teach me." And so he said, "It's like $35. And then you also have a National Forest bigger fee." And he said, "But do you have a senior pass?" And I said, "Yeah, for the parks, but not for this." And he said, "You don't understand. This gets you into anything." And so I was able to, for $10 a night, a $10 bill, camp 7 different campsites, 10 each. Think of that. We mollycoddle our senior citizens. That's not fair to young people, young couples starting out.
Not like you'd trade away your youth for this privilege, but it is a good thing.
I don't think
to
it's
have.
fair. I'm glad to
Yeah.
have it, but I don't think it's fair. I think we should be telling young families that we'll subsidize you to go to the national parks.
Well, I agree with you on that because
we don't need the money.
We don't.
I'm glad to have it. We don't need
I
it.
would much rather see a whole lot of tax dollars dumped into national parks than many, many other things.
Right, I would have paid $30 a night if I knew the money was going to go to the national parks. But now I learned that $2.5 million is going to will have happened by the time people hear this, the July 4th presidential fireworks parade in Washington, D.C. this year. $2.5 million diverted from the Park Service for that purpose. Your tax dollars at work. Anyway, so I had the greatest time. I read a ton. I read more than I normally get to do. I saw a fair amount of wildlife. I wrote. I mused, I dreamed, I reviewed my life, I thought about Thoreau, I memorized passages, I took photographs, I took long walks and strolls and hikes, and I thought about rivers. And where does the water come from? Why does it just keep on coming? The river starts high in the mountains and it never stops flowing. You think, whoa, where does all that water come from and where does it go?
Well, I'm glad you had such a wonderful trip, and I am glad that you are back.
I'm doing it. I just want to see someone to send me a good used high-end pickup with about 60,000 miles on it. I've got an option on a camper. A guy I met in South Dakota, I'm buying that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try to go like 2 or 3 months a year in different parts of the year for the rest of my life.
Your tents are pretty good.
No.
You're not a tent camper.
I'm Steinbeck. I want I want that where you invite the Canuck potato farmers in for a drink or in your little rig, and they come over and then they tell you their story, and then you write it up, and you go to Castleton, North Dakota on the Maple River, and you meet an itinerant Shakespearean elocutionist, and you invite him in, and you bond and talk about the bard and talk about literature.
What a life you've got.
Yeah. Just if people will give me the gift.
Do you remember a couple of weeks ago we did a show called Baked In?
Yes, indeed.
And it was quite an interesting discussion. We got a lot of mail.
After the break, we should look at it.
I
I think I heard you saying we need to take. Let me be David. I am the semi-permanent guest first host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour here with Clay Jenkinson and this special edition of the Jefferson Hour. We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we have a lot of mail from our listeners, which we very much admire and always welcome. Let's take a short break. You are listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
You don't sound anything like me.
You haven't heard yourself.
Lucky for you.
Yeah.
We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. And Clay, may I say thank you for sharing so much about your trip. It's just delightful to hear it all.
Oh, I'll be doing more of it. And, I just say this much. We are so blessed to live in this country. We are so blessed to live in a country that's set aside more than 500 million acres of itself as permanent recreational heartland. This is something that is magnificently and uniquely American.
Agreed, sir. A privilege for all of us. When we took our break, we promised to come back to a show from a couple of weeks ago called Baked In.
Well, that's a phrase I had not heard until the 2016 election.
Well, explain what you wanted to accomplish in that discussion.
Well, the term, just to define it for anyone who isn't familiar with it, the idea is that people's views of, say, Nancy Pelosi are baked in, that they're set, that not much would change that view, that's a kind of it's in concrete. And similarly, that their view of Donald Trump is baked in. And so he says if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, his followers would stay with him. And that seems actually to be true. And so a lot of this is true. There's people are baked into Fox's view of the world, and they're baked into MSNBC's view of the world, and so on. And it does appear that there's not much room to negotiate in our culture at this point. And so the question is that good for us? Well, obviously it's not. We need to be open-minded. Every one of us needs to say, I could be convinced. Tell me more. In debate, informal debate, say in high school and college, people are the debate might be like abortion is killing. And then people say, where are you on this? And I say, that's what I say. That's what I believe. And then the instructor will say, all right, take the other side. And the idea is if you learn to take the other side, A, you learn to be a great debater, but B, it keeps your mind open, that it's important. Maybe abortion's the wrong choice because people have absolute feelings about that. But it's important in every way that you can in life to keep your mind as open as you possibly can keep it.
There were a number of letters, quite a few actually, about that program, and some of it gets a little partisan.
Let's hear it.
Which really isn't our intent. The whole baked-in thing was...
nonpartisan, really.
That's the
goal.
Charles Crispack. I recently finished listening to the baked-in episode and was bothered by repeatedly hearing the idea that both sides are contributing to the political divide in this country. Anyone with a lick of common sense knows which side is responsible.
Wait. Can I stop you?
Yes, you can.
All right, so read that again.
Anyone with a lick of common sense knows which side is responsible.
Okay, so guess how this is going to come out. Because this could be written by either side. Go ahead.
Extremists on the right are placing children in concentration camps and attempting to establish an American monarchy, while extremists on the left are attempting to secure health care for all and eroding the wealth gap. If the argument is between children in cages and children not in cages, there is no room for compromise.
Okay, so those, if you were a professor of logic, you would want to try to unpack that. But read the last sentence again, if you would.
If the argument is between children in cages and children not in cages, there is no room for compromise.
I largely agree with that. So in other words, it's one thing to talk about baked in and partisanship and so on, and how you characterize the other. It's another thing to really concentrate on what's going on our southern border. And
but the point is how do you get that to end?
What's the remedy?
That's the discussion that needs to take place.
And in my view, in life, I've had some controversies, and I've certainly lived through very volatile periods, although none so volatile as this. My answer is always the same, David. What's the remedy? What's the remedy? What's the remedy?
Me too. Agreed.
And so I'm more interested in that than assigning blame. I do believe that the right can say that Obama did some detention and the families were sometimes separated, and I hear the left, and I get
What's
it.
Obama got to do with it?
Well, I'm just saying that these are complex issues with a long and sordid history, that there are no saints, and there are no full sinners, that we really need to try to step back and say, all right, if this is going on the southern border, what's the remedy? Because no humane person wants to separate parents from their children, and no humane person wants to neglect or abuse people that are in the custody of the United States of America. So what's the remedy? Let's work on that rather than brickbats.
Here's one that I liked a lot from Gina Douglas.
Gina Douglas.
And she starts by saying, first of all, I want to say that your personal essay in episode 1344 was very insightful. I would like to see you print it out and put it on a webpage that I could share on Facebook. Well,
I think we do that.
Gina, we do that. If you would just
go to Jefferson Hour.
jeffersonhour.com.
They're all there, right?
They're all there. On the other hand, I think that you are fundamentally misinforming your listeners with this concept of baked in. The following might even be an example that I first heard from you. The interviewer has two people on to debate the origin of the moon. The first guy gives a complex answer about a protoplanet hitting a young Earth, throwing a bunch of debris into space that eventually coalesced into the moon. The second guy says that the moon is made of green cheese. The media reports experts disagree on origin of the moon. It makes equivalent actual fact and utter nonsense. She says, I am baked in against Trump based on fact. My sister is baked in for Trump based on lies and nonsense. Ooh,
well, but that's a fun family reunion.
When you say that we need to get off these baked-in positions, you make equivalency between an enlightened stance and an ignorant one.
This is such a hard discussion because, of course, that's true. You know, if let's go back to enhanced interrogation techniques. If the debate is should the United States use torture, that's one thing. But if one side is waterboarding and doing sleep deprivation and stripping people and putting electrodes on their body, and then they say that's not torture, well, now the debate's over. If you can't agree on certain things, certain facts you have to be able to agree on, and certain principles you have to agree on. So is torture waterboarding? If you're going to say that waterboarding is not torture, then we're not going to get very far because we can't agree on the basic terminology and the basic set of principles. And so these two letter writers are right. I mean, that you don't want to have Hitler debating Franklin Roosevelt and say leaders disagree about extermination of the Jews. Of course there are things that are beyond equivalency, of course. But the thing is that these two letter writers need to remember is that the other side feels the same way. Their culture of outrage is that they think that the left, that the major media, the establishment, the deep state is manipulating evidence and terminology and debates in exactly the same way these two are saying the other side. And I'm not saying they're equivalent. You and I have opinions. I think people know what they are. But if you're really going to go down that path, you're not going to get very far if you just say we're enlightened and they're morons. We tell the truth and they are liars. Our points of view have virtue and theirs are evil.
But I like the letter because it's sort of a key to understanding how far that baked in goes. I mean, it's a very good point, but you're right. Either side could be green cheese in the eyes of the other.
Well, they certainly are in the eyes of the other. What these two are saying may be so, but that's not the actual truth. And I tend to agree with them. But boy, go to a CPAC convention and you have tens of thousands of people who would end each of those sentences with, and that's what's wrong with the left.
And if we had someone who could lead us into finding common ground.
Who might that be? Who could lead us into common ground?
You have another letter on the same subject that we'll close this out with.
This is from David Tetrick. Let me say I'm a little uncomfortable with this discussion because I know how strongly people feel, and I know that this is a deeply polarized time. And I know that each side tends to vilify the other.
But the whole intent of that program was to call attention to that, to further civil discourse. And I hope that's what it did.
I have a view of all of this, but that's not the purpose of the program. The purpose of that program was to say we have to get back into the negotiation room and lower the temperature and try to agree on certain things in the center if we can, and certainly try to agree on facts and then decide what to do about it, but that the intense polarization and name-calling is making it almost impossible for us to have a rational national conversation about these things. So here's this letter from David Tetrick. Dear Mr. Jenkinson, I wish to thank you for your thoughts in the recent episode Baked In with respect. I wish you had delved more deeply into an aspect of our modern American political life that President Jefferson may not have encountered to the same degree we do. While President Jefferson surely railed against the printing and speaking of deliberately harmful lies, and with him I agree wholeheartedly, what are we to do when faced with, and please forgive the language, BS? The philosopher Harry Frankfurt defined this term as speech intended to persuade without regard for truth, and is something that has become even more prevalent in today's national discourse. If we are to engage once again in civil discourse, how would you or Jefferson recommend we speak with someone who does not care at all about the truth or accuracy of their beliefs or speech? Well, there's a letter about this that we'll post. Jefferson said that, this is, I think, to his grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, who was going off to Boston, and he said that don't get into disputes with these people because it's like getting into a dispute with an insane bull. That if there's no room for civil discourse and mutual accommodations,
Walk away.
you just have to walk away because you're not going to win. You come away then frustrated and diminished by it. So there are certain people that it's just not worth debating. And so if someone said to me, well, let's say there were a United States senator from North Dakota who about the detention of children on the border said, oh, it's fine to put them in cages because all of our children like to go to these playgrounds and they have chain link fences, so there's no problem. Well, now you're done. You're finished. That conversation is over. If that's how he sees the world, that the chain link fences of cages on the border are the equivalent of chain link perimeter fences in a playground where the parents can come in at any time to get their children and make sure that they get their teeth brushed and that their bodily needs are met and that they're fed nutritious food and they're not being abused in any way. If you're going to say that a chain link fence is a chain link fence, even if it's a cage for one person and a $500,000 playground for another child, the discussion is now over. There is no place to take that discussion. But if someone said, we all feel terrible about these detentions, it's a very complex issue. We have to find ways to hold people. Our borders are now being overwhelmed. The money's not yet in place to do this right. The laws are ambiguous. It puts any administration in a very difficult position. How can we all find some common ground to right this, to remedy this in a way that is humane but enforces the immigration laws of the United States and the asylum laws and responds respectfully to court rulings? Then we can have a discussion. But if your view is no harm, no foul down there, discussion over. But if your view is these are concentration camps that should be likened to Auschwitz, the discussion is equally over at that point. We have to find common ground.
That was the whole point of that discussion, that show, to me, is what you just said.
And so that's what we're looking for is, so you and I sometimes disagree. Mm-hmm. The thing to do is to say, well, David, or for you to say, well, Clay, have you thought about this? Or how do you respond to that then? Or do you think this is solid evidence or is this anecdotal? If it's true, what should be done about it? In other words, a series of Socratic questions where you're not judging, you're not presuming that there's a right answer. You really aren't trying to tease out more clarification from somebody who's saying something that you disagree with. That's important. And the second important thing is to be willing to be persuaded. So in other words, what would persuade me that things are going about as well on the border as they could go under the circumstances? Am I willing to have that? Am I willing to be persuaded to that view? If I can't say yes, then either this is the worst thing that ever happened and any rational person would condemn it, or I'm not really open to hearing how complex this situation may be. I'm not defending what's going on the border, believe me. But I'm saying that open-mindedness is the beginning of all wisdom.
Could I move on to another?
Please, do somewhere else.
We had enough.
Anywhere.
Okay. We did a show called, I think it was 40 Books or something. We did
The books,
a
yeah.
couple of different book shows. We got an email from Fred Carpenter.
Fred Carpenter.
Yes. And he says, what was the title and author of the book written in the early 1800s? An interview with a man from Kentucky who was one of Jefferson's overseers.
Edmund Bacon was Jefferson's overseer, and he left a memoir. It wasn't an interview. And he wrote an account of Jefferson, and it's brilliant. And you can find it almost anywhere. Just write in Jefferson Plantation, Edmund Bacon, and versions will come up on the internet.
Mm-hmm. It's a good read. It seems to me there was a collection that you could find online for free of something like the Essential Jefferson. I can't remember exactly, but you're right. You can find this.
And there's also a great book for people that are interested, edited by the great Merrill Peterson, one of the greatest Jefferson scholars ever, and it's called Visitors to Monticello. It's a slender book of a couple hundred pages, but he went through and picked out accounts of people who had visited Monticello and what they said about the place and about Jefferson. And it's a great book.
Another one that I really enjoyed is, I think it's called The Domestic Life.
By Sarah Jefferson Randolph, his granddaughter, The Domestic Life of Thomas Jefferson, which is another great book because in these you get little glimpses at Jefferson without his mask on. Jefferson who's not writing a letter to the world. This is Jefferson in relaxation at home. And one of the things that she says that I just love is she says he anticipated. He was broke. He didn't have any money, but he anticipated our every need. And she'd said, we might be talking, the granddaughters, just quietly about a guitar. And then suddenly a guitar appears, and Granddad got it for us because he heard us talking about it, and he wanted us to learn how to play the guitar.
He loved his grandchildren.
He got them their first Shakespeare's. He had that ability to, great gift givers have that ability to not buy an expensive gift, but buy a perfect gift.
Again, Mr. Carpenter, Fred Carpenter, just do a Google search for Edmund Bacon.
Edmund Bacon, Overseer Memoir.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a real contemporary publication of that, but I know you can find it.
Oh, but they're all good, and the essence is right there. It's only a short thing of a few dozen pages.
Quickly, before we take our next break, we got a letter from Mark Matley.
Mark Matley.
Yeah, 40 Books episode. You mentioned an author, Joseph Addison, who helped Jefferson to form ideas how to be a man, the correct amount of emotional detachment.
Addison and Steele. So these were essayists in Britain in the age of Alexander Pope, so a generation before Jefferson. And Joseph Addison and Steele wrote these very gentlemanly, detached.
Well, he says he researched
essays.
Mr. Addison, but he authored hundreds of books. Do you know the title of the book you were referring to?
Yes, the book in question is a collection of their essays. These genial, ironic, life-affirming, smooth and suave essays about life in Britain, particularly London. It's called The Spectator, and it was published between 1711 and 1712. This was kind of the beginning of the occasional essay in British literature, and the authors are Joseph Addison and Richard Steele. Steele with an E at the end, Steele. There were 555 of them, which is a lot. Addison and Steele, The Spectator, and every gentleman of the 18th century, Jefferson and Aaron Burr and John Marshall and John Adams and so on and so forth, and many women, Abigail Adams and Mercy Otis Warren and others, would have read Addison and Steele, if for nothing else for the prose style, which was so clear and lucid.
Well, I hope that helps somewhat, sir. Right now we need to take a short break, and when we come back, we have a letter which someone referred to as the best letter
Ever.
we ever got.
I want to hear that.
I want you to read that. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm Clay Jenkinson, this week out of character, and sitting across from me is the semi-permanent guest host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. David Swenson.
Hello, sir. This letter came in And I think the response from our webmaster was, "This is the best thing I've ever read in my whole life." Maybe a bit tongue-in-cheek, but the subject was devoted to Jefferson and completely embarrassed by it.
Oh, my. Well, the author of the letter is Ophelia.
Because why not?
And why not? It says, I don't have anything to ask a humanities scholar or anything really. I must say that I suffer daily from an impossible love for a man that has been dead 193 years. I'm completely aware of the silliness. I'm also acutely aware that Jefferson himself would have been disturbed rather than flattered if he were still alive. I confess that I love Thomas Jefferson. I confess that every day there is a moment between sleep and waking I spend looking at his face and memorizing the aroma in the hallucination. Maybe after confession there will be some forgiveness that someone somewhere can offer, and I can be cured. Maybe that's the point of it. So can she be cured? Well, if Ophelia, if you've been listening very long, you know that Jefferson was not a saint.
Well, she says she fasted from all things Jefferson, including the show, for about 3 years in an attempt to thwart insanity, but it sounds like she's come back.
I think she's right in it. How do we go about this? There are programs. There is a detox center for Jeffersonians. I think if you move to Braintree, Massachusetts, and go to
there's an idea.
John Adams' house.
That's an idea, yeah.
And he would say of this young woman, no doubt you was fast asleep in philosophic tranquility, if you thought that of Mr. Jefferson. Well, that's great. Jefferson needs his advocates. I just got a call from the Wall Street Journal, David. They are doing an article on an idea at the University of Virginia to take down Jefferson's statue.
Well, you've left me a perfect segue, sir.
So my point is, this is not a time when Jefferson has unlimited fan base. And so if this young woman adores him and a day can't go by without her attempting to get the aroma of his historical personage, he needs all of the advocates he can get.
We do love the mail we get, and this one just sort of popped in. I hope that it's nothing that's going to harm her, and we sure enjoyed reading it.
Or us, for that matter.
Yeah. You were just talking about renaming. Kimberly Tross wrote to us, and with a couple of corrections for you, because I know you love that.
Yes, I do. What are they?
Well, you talked about the mayor of Indianapolis running for president.
Yes.
That would be Pete Buttigieg.
South Bend,
Indiana.
Sorry, yes, that's a good one.
And you talked about, you brought up about how he had wanted to rename all things Jefferson.
What's the truth?
She said his comments have been misconstrued and promulgated in right-wing media sources.
Let's hear the truth.
And this was on Hugh Hewitt's radio show.
Right, I know that name.
And they were nuanced. Here they are in full. Hewitt asks him about the Jefferson-Jackson dinner in Indiana.
The Democrats have these spring dinners called Jefferson-Jackson dinners.
And Buttigieg says, yeah, we're doing that in Indiana. I think it's the right thing to do.
What, to not name them that anymore?
Should Jefferson-Jackson dinners be renamed everywhere?
Right. We're doing that in Indiana. All right.
They're doing that in Indiana. I think it's the right thing to do, over time. You develop and evolve on things you choose to honor. And I think we know enough, especially Jackson, you just look at what basically amounts to genocide that happened here. Jefferson's more problematic. There's a lot to, of course, admire in his thinking and his philosophy. Then again, as you plunge into his writings, especially notes on the state of Virginia, you know that he knew slavery was wrong.
And then he goes on to say, and this is, I think, very good. He says, and yet he did it. Now we're all morally conflicted human beings, and it's not like we're blotting him out of the history books or deleting him from being the founder. But naming something after somebody confers a certain amount of honor. And at a time, the real person, I think there's a lot of pressure on this. It's a relationship between the past and the present. We're finding in a million different ways that racism isn't some curiosity out of the past, and we're embarrassed but have moved on from. It's alive. It's well, and it's hurting people. And it's one of the main reasons to be in politics today, to try to change or reverse the harms that went along with that. So I think he's saying he's not just condemning Jefferson out of hand and saying erase him from American history, but I think he is saying that Jefferson is a loaded problem and that it can be hurtful. But I stand by my point that Mayor Pete of South Bend, I stand corrected, is saying that he would welcome certain erasures of Jefferson from our public discourse. And I disagree with that, but he's certainly entitled to that view, and a lot of people would go much farther than he has.
Well, I think the letter was to sort of correct the record, so you've done that.
And I apologize for getting South Bend wrong. I think that...
That's not the only thing you got wrong.
Which was the other?
Well...
Let's hear it.
Quick Draw McGraw.
No way.
Yep.
No, I stand by it. I'll do the thinning around here, Baba Louie.
He was not a dog. He was a horse. And you referred to him as a dog.
You're right.
And
he was a horse.
And we got numerous.
I'm glad. Really? That's what they're hearing?
The first one came in from Walt Mahoney.
What did he say?
Quick Draw McGraw was a horse, not a dog.
Was anyone snarky, or were they nice?
Well, how can you not be? I mean, how do you read that?
Oh, that was a good one.
We're talking about,
give me another one.
I don't think you even listen to the web podcast.
I don't dare. I would never again now.
Well, let me just say that whole audio segment was added in under fair use. So,
right, but tell me more. What others? No one's...
No, it was just short notes like that.
But I think we got...
Walt was the first.
Ophelia wrote and said, I can never listen to you again if you get Quick Draw wrong. I no longer worship Thomas Jefferson. And
then back to something that you can help somebody with. Daniel Claycomb wrote, and he wants some advice. He's going to Greece.
Okay.
At the end of July, early August. And he would like your recommendations for things I should not miss.
Oh, my. I will take his email and write him a long note, but you must not miss the Museum of National History in Athens, which is one of the great museums in the country. And you can see it in about 2.5 hours. It's right in the heart of Athens. Of course, you have to go to the Parthenon, maybe the world's greatest single building, and also to the Parthenon Museum. And when you get to the Parthenon Museum, which is at the base of the Acropolis, it has all the marbles that have survived from the Parthenon, and then blank spaces when they finally get them back from Great Britain, which stole them in 1816, the Elgin marbles. So you do that. If you have time, you need to go to the Peloponnese, to Mycenae. Mycenae was the palace culture that's written about in Homer's Iliad. The Mycenaean palace there is an incredibly beautiful, stark place where you just feel like you're walking into the third book of Homer's Iliad, and on and on and on.
You don't have any plans to do another tour of Greece?
Yes, I do.
We just have a few minutes left before it's time for your essay this week.
Yes, sir.
But I wanted to repeat,
Crete.
There was a date that you needed to confirm, remember, for France, and
yes,
I want to make sure we get the right one.
So the Jefferson in France tour, and there are about 6 places left on that.
People who don't know, you do cultural tours
all over the place.
Yes.
This is what people have been asking for years. When are you going to go to France? When are you going to go to France? So now we are. We're going October 17th through 26th of this year, Jefferson's France. If you're interested in Jefferson in France, this is the trip to come on. It's going to be unbelievable. I'm so excited about it. I've been reading up a storm about it.
But we misstated the dates.
I did. I gave the dates as later. It's 17th through 26th of October.
And again, if you really want to get all the hardcore information, go to jeffersonhour.com and there'll be a link.
Do come. 1784 to 1789, Jefferson in France, amongst the 5 best years of his life. It's just a spectacular cultural tour. I've done it twice before, but not for a long time. And so I'm very eager for this.
Okay, I have one final test before we go to this week's essay. What was Quick Draw McGraw?
He was a horse.
Very good.
I'll do the thinning around here, Baba Louie. It's all right. Hey, Quickstraw, I wouldn't go into that jail without a gun.
Thanks very much for a fun conversation. It really has been. And welcome back from your big trip, and thanks for sharing that.
And to all of you, we must open our minds even when we don't feel like it, because we cannot recover in this country until we learn to respect that which we find hard to accept. Even when we think it's dead wrong, we have to realize that when the mirror switches and it's the other person looking into it, they feel righteous and regard us as the enemy. Flip it, we feel righteous and regard them as the enemy. You cannot have a Jefferson republic under such conditions. That's the point of not being baked in.
Thank you, sir. And it is now time for this week's Jefferson Watch.
The last time I wrote to all of you, I was about to embark on my John Steinbeck Jr. camper truck journey in Colorado. I had no idea what to expect. The rig I rented in Denver was really designed for backcountry exploring. Heavy tires, a very powerful engine, shovels and other equipment attached to the side, and 4 extra cans for gas affixed to the back of the rig. I could have gone off-road into the Slick Rock Canyon country of Utah, but that was not my intention. I spent my week in the fabulous country between Rocky Mountain National Park and Salida, between the Rocky Mountain Front and Aspen. There are dozens of National Forest campgrounds in that region, sometimes labeled the top of the world. I stayed in 7 of them. I was alone. There were a few people I would have shared at least part of that journey with, but this one needed to be solo for a variety of reasons. The camper had a refrigerator, a kitchen, a queen-size bed up over the cab of the pickup, a table, and, as Steinbeck says, room for 3 or 4 people if you don't have many personal space issues. I'd find my next National Forest campground about 1 or 2 p.m., determine either the most scenic or the most isolated campsite, claim it, pull out my yellow camp chair and a cold soda, and read off and on for the rest of the afternoon. I'd walk around snooping out other people's rigs and make sure there wasn't a much better campsite to move to, but mostly I would read and take notes and doze and gaze at the aspen or cottonwood trees or just listen to the breeze in the pines. There is no greater joy, there are few greater joys than reading for an afternoon in a beautiful place. A comfortable chair, a cold drink, the breeze in the trees, the low ripple of the river slipping by on its way to the Gulf, the pure joy of feeling the sun on your face after a long winter. Later in the afternoon you look up to study the sky. Perhaps a modest thunderstorm forms in the west. There is still snow on the mountains. People walk by with their dogs, and they speak in hushed tones. If the reading is good, the cold drink is eventually replaced with a glass of wine. You are almost too lazy to get up and cook dinner. Read, daydream, read, take a stroll, imagine, fantasize, read, sip, gaze into thin air. I was never afraid except once, when a cluster of Homo sapiens commandeered a whole National Forest campground as a place to shoot guns, shoot fireworks, and play the most aggressive country music deep into the night with decibels enough to fill Denver's Red Rocks. Add some serious grain alcohol to that mix, and you begin to feel you have woken up in a Mad Max movie. I fear no bear or moose, but I admit to sometimes fearing Homo sapiens. There is no greater freedom than being somewhere in the American West with nowhere you have to be, ambling in search of the perfect platonic campsite, living on little, and just giving yourself to all that astonishing open public land. When I have lived abroad, the thing I've missed most is the outback, the national forests, national parks, national monuments, the endless highways, especially secondary highways, the sheer immensity of America, and all the lesser state parks scattered around the country. Ken Burns called the national parks America's best idea. I don't agree with that. Jefferson's great sentence beginning, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," is America's best idea. But the parks and forests and monuments and wildlife refuges are right up there. I read more in a week than I get to read in a month. I wrote a good deal, and my muse was a sweet, gentle, generous breeze that laved me like a Greek goddess. I came away with a few insights and a few resolutions. Here's a resolution. I'm writing a new book. Actually, I am simultaneously working on several. On about day 2, I tried to reckon how much of my life I have spent watching TV. This after one of the books I was reading, The Heart of the Humanities by Mark Edmondson, argued that watching TV is a double offense. First, you are watching TV and not doing something more Jeffersonian. Second, you are sitting on a couch or a chair. So you're wasting your mind and wasting your body at the same time, Edmondson says. Though this is obvious, I had never thought about it in that way before, so I spent a lot of time blushing out there in the wilderness and looking for a tree to hang myself in. So I resolved not to watch any television until I finished writing this book, which I reckon will be about Thanksgiving. By then, with any luck, I will have forgotten what television is. I seem not to have missed much. When I disappeared into the wild, President Trump was saying and doing things that pleased his base and drove others nuts. When I came out, President Trump was saying and doing things that pleased his base and drove everyone else nuts. It's like I turned off the universe with a switch for a week and a half. Second resolution. I'm going to find a way to spend much more time in a Steinbeck-like camper rig. Steinbeck knew what he was doing. When I see those giant bus RVs of the sort that rock stars use, or the fifth wheels that are as long as a semi-truck, I'm grossed out. I'm intrigued by the wee little teardrop trailers that are quite common now, the ones that fold out and become a kind of one-person sensory deprivation chamber. My young engineer friend Robin was last known to be building her own little trailer rig by welding spare rocket parts and struts from old windmills. But the Steinbeck camper van is, for me, just tidy and miniature enough, just comfortable enough, capable of going wherever a pickup goes in the world, and intensely romantic. My dream is to buy a used rig and a used pickup and go see the country for a year or two, about 6 month-long treks per annum, with stops at home in Dakota to swap out my traveling library and take care of some tasks. I named my little starter trek Clay's Search for America, or a bit of it, and I would expand that to a full meandering exploration of America. I always cheer up when I get out into the heart of the country, into rural America, or into the wild. It's always wonderful to realize again how vast this country is, how diverse, how astonishingly beautiful it is, and how much of it has been set aside. Thank you, Theodore Roosevelt, for our spiritual renewal. I'm Clay Jenkinson. We'll see you next week for another exciting edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public Radio. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author, Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any past show for a $12 donation, please call 888-828-2853. Again, that number is 888-828-2853. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.org and on iTunes. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.org. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Music by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson.